Please subscribe, like, and share.
But anyway, what I want to talk about here today is, should you build a 302 to a 331 or 347? Or we're talking about street here, okay? We're not talking about racing. Or should you build or do a 351 swap? Not an LS swap, 351. The reason I say that is, this junkyard's already caught on, okay? They're charging a lot of money for an LS engine because they know hot rodders like you are going after them. But what I'm giving you an alternative here. Why don't you do a 351 swap, okay, on your Fox body? Why is that? Because they're perhaps cheaper out there, just as plentiful as a LS. Remember, you break LSs left and right, and so you would too, with a 351. But you got to prepare them before you start doing modifications in them. Just don't throw them in and blow up and grab it out. Get some basic thing. But anyway, we'll try to do what the LS guys are doing to their engines, but we're doing it with a 351 and see what it's gonna pan out. Now, before we start, let me thank G. Brown from Los Angeles, California. It's an old friend of mine, and I've built him an engine before. It's actually a Mustang 66 with a 347, and here it is on the dyno. It made stock 320 horsepower, and that's with a 9-to-1 dish piston. Remember, I warned everybody about running a dish piston, but that's what he had at that time. And he said, let's do it. Just do the heads, prep the heads, support the heads, and just see what you can do with it, and give me some power. Well, it made decent power, 320 at the back wheel, give or take, at 9-to-1. If you really think about it, he's down about 40 horsepower per compression point, 30 to 40 horsepower. So if he had a 10.5-to-1 from 9-to-1, guess what? You probably have 30 or 40 more horsepower. So that puts him 360 horse. And then if he had another compression point of 11.5-to-1 or 11-to-1, he could probably make another 30 or 40 on top of that, which would put him squarely around 400 horsepower. Pretty much what a lot of people are getting today on their 347. At the other aspect too, we will boost this combination later on, and I did this video about his engine not that long ago. On the other hand, he has an F100. That he got basically a junkyard 351 that was in good shape. I think it's a 96 roller block. But what he did was, he put some heads on it. But before he did that, his F100 with a 351 made, let me see here, 258 horsepower with a stock head, stock camshaft, with an FI Tech fuel injection on top. And same thing with his 347, it was a FI Tech fuel injection. And his, like I said, had made 320 with an aftermarket Edelbrock RPM head. So with an RPM head, he made 320, possible 400 with a big compression boost of about 11.5-to-1. He could easily make that, but since it's not 9-to-1, it compares favorably with his 351 engine that we're going to be highlighting here with the 347 build. The 351 also has 9-to-1. This is how the block looks like with the pistons. The 347 had round dish pistons, which I told you guys before. I'm not for it, but since we're blowing boosted to this thing, it is not as drastic or as bad as it would have been. But granted, it'd also be up on horsepower if this was a complete flat top. Now the 351, it looks like this. It has a D-style dish in it with the upper and lower, the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position on the quench. The head still works effectively, not like if you would a round dish on the piston. This combination, 60 horsepower down from his 347. This is with a stock head, okay? So, it's about right. So the 347 and 351 is very close to each other, cubic inch wise, except the 302 has a shorter rod at 5,400. 351's got a 596 or was it 590? Almost a 6-inch rod. Just call it a 6-inch rod. Okay, it has benefits for top end power as opposed to a shorter rod. When we look at this two combination, the 302, 347, 9-to-1 with Edelbrock RPM heads, and then the 351 9-to-1 with stock heads made 328, made 258 horsepower. So that's down 60, and I attribute the difference between the 347 and the 351 because of the cylinder head. It is obvious. Better breathing on an otherwise similar cubic inch produced more power. That's not a surprise. Remember, the 351 exhaust port is horrible. I dealt with that in my early years of racing. Right in that tiny exhaust port, there's a dog leg on the very roof of the port, right where the activity, the maximum flow goes to. There's this big, like a, not really a door stop, but a dog leg stop, cutting off flow or impeding the flow. That's why they could never compete until you do something with that exhaust. Then you have something. For the races I've done back then, they would leave the line quick and then choke off. But once you put the big valves in there and fix the exhaust, okay, you got something, okay? But still not as good as a Chevrolet, legacy block. Like I said, the 351, 302 legacy blocks as well. Today, they're all different. LS engines, Coyote, there's the new legacy block for the younger kids when they grow up. Now let's go back to the 351. So made 258 difference withstanding. That was with a stock cam, stock cylinder head, but it's got headers with a pull. Okay, the headers worked out real well, and I've seen during the early years, bolting on a set of headers on a 351 stock head will get you 40, 60 horsepower. That is not surprising because it needs all the help it can get on the exhaust side. Now moving up, what G did was he went from running 91 octane, he put a Vortec V3, small tiny blower. With a small tiny, he went to an E85 fuel. What's good with this is that E85 burns more consistent and it's cooler coming into the combustion chamber. If you compare gasoline has a higher heat content when you graph the ignition burn pattern on race gas or even 90, 91, 93. You see spikes. With race gas or street pump gas, there are spikes. This spikes is what makes it difficult for us to really nail the tuning on pump gas or race gas. This spikes is the one that's going to grab you and detonate damage your ringland, your piston, or blow a head gasket, or does something destructive. Maybe all of that combined. You know, loosen the bottom end, so forth and so on. Now E85 is a cooler fuel, but you're adding more to make up for the inferior heat content. The BT uses a lot less, or is less generally. But when you graph the ignition burn pattern on a graph on E85 or most, or let's say alcohol-based fuel, you'll see consistent, hardly any spikes. So when it's consistent, guess what? You can tune more closely because you're not going to have any of those spikes that gets you in trouble. If that fuel is consistent, it goes by, then you can really get close to your edge and still be safe. Or if you do back down conservatively on your tune, then you got something going on. For example, what I've learned through the years, when I run 91 octane with octane booster, okay, on 347s that I've done for many street guys back then. And what happens is that with 15 pounds of boost, okay, on a 347 with a stock HO block, which is not really stout, they're kind of flimsy. When I get 570 horsepower at the back wheel, 570, 670, that's almost 700 horsepower flywheel. It becomes shaky. The moment my customers or friends at that time, many of my customers ended up being my friends. I go to their wedding, I go to their baptism, whatever. Hey, my wife at that time told me, my ex-wife told me, you'll never be successful because all your customers end up to be your friends. Well, that's the way I am, I guess. So be it. It's not all about money, you know, business. Sometimes you produce relationships with these people. Until today, I got friends I met from the racetrack 40, 30, 50 years ago, I guess, you know. I'm an old man, oh my God. But anyway, let's go back to the subject. So, when we have pump gas with octane booster, or when they run, you know, 100 octane, and they boost it with a Vortec V1 or supercharger V2, whatever they're doing back then. 576 or more than once, many times. Once they go to a high altitude track and they miss their base timing or their total timing, or they lean out a little bit and they start having detonation or preignition, boom, the block is cracked. I never had a successful 600 horsepower without getting, they will run for a while, but eventually they'll bust open. Going back with G Brown as an example, okay, the same combination, but with a V3 baby blower, should not have made, or at best made close to 570, right? Not really. If you refer to my old video, G Brown made 636, 640, between 630, 640 horsepower with 14 pounds of boost. Just like what my old Vortec gas and gasoline were doing.
I'm doing it! I'm doing it!
But he made 60 to 70 horsepower more just on the fuel, and he cut it off at 6,000. And I tell you what, he drives this on the street. He's not busting them and not splitting the block, and that's also an HO block. So when you look at this combination here, the fuel's ability to burn consistent without the spikes that is prevalent with pump gas or even race gas that gets us a little bit past the threshold, but if it does it every little bit, considering, when you're at high RPM, let's say 8,000 or 7,000, you're going up and down 50 plus times per second. So if you have spikes, how many in that per second out of the 50 or 60 that the piston went up for ignition that you had combustion spikes? So a big possibility. Now with E85, smooth test, so actually you can get close to your limit and be safe, or back down the same amount if you're running gasoline 91 or 93, you'll be safer off. You're going to be better off. But 630 to 640, and this doggone thing is still alive. It's testament to E85. That's why when people call me and they ask me, hey, what should I build? I said, you have access to E85? That's my first question. A lot of you guys that talk to me on the phone about your street engines, you probably recall me always asking, is there E85 available around your area? And if there was, I'd strongly recommend it. Now let's go to the 351. A lot of people buy LS, they throw it in their car, boost it, and blows up, or blower it, blows up, and they get another one. And you can do the same thing with the 351. But what we're going to talk about here is how much power can we make or get out of them. Now, G brought a 351 roller block from a 72 F250, from a 96 F250. So when G called me up asking about his roller block 351, and he asked me, hey Ben, should I get the 170 or the 160? I go, well, go get the biggest one you could stuff in there. He goes, why? I thought I should put a small one like a 160 or the entry-level AFRs or whatever heads are out there, Edelbrock. I said, no, just go with a 220. You're going to find out, you're not going to be having any low-speed issues because you're boosted. You're not going to have any, weak bottom end because you're boosted. Okay, so remember, and I explained to him, when you have a 351, when it ingests the fuel and air, it's 351 cubic inches. Ingesting 351 cubic inches of displacement or air. We're not even talking about ramming it in there, because of long runners, all that stuff that we talk about, artificially supercharging the air column through the manifold, through the runner. When you look at, and you're boosting an engine 15 psi, or even 14 pounds. That's basically double the displacement. So a 351 will act like 351 times 2, right? It's at least 702 cubic inches of total air it's ingesting or took in. All right, so we measure the cubic inches by how much air it takes in there. It's just not just a bore times stroke scenario here that we're talking about. We're looking at the actual effect. How much did that engine ingest? 100% of its capacity, or 200% of its capacity, or double if it's 100% or 200. So that engine's displacing 700 cubic inches. It can use a big port. So when somebody tells you, oh, start with a 160 or 170 or 160, don't even waste your time, even for a 302. Just go ahead and put a 180 minimum, okay? Because it really, if you're gonna use those smallish aftermarket head, you can get beat by a cast iron head with that's been ported by somebody really, really good and really embarrass you. So put some top end in it, or some top end capability, and I tell you what, a 302 is very sensitive to that. It likes big ports because it's a short stroke, 4-inch bore, 3-inch stroke with a short rod. It descends was a 509 and a 515 with a 289. The piston comes down pretty quickly on a 302, and it can take a little bit of porting or bigger port than normal. Now let's get back and we got display, and we got sidetrack a bit. So he did buy some 220 Renegade heads, and but he made 258 horsepower. Yes, at the wheels at the Dyno NA 91 octane fuel. Now he also, like his 347, put a blower, and he put a what blower? V1 T1 trim. A little bit bigger than his 347. And remember, now it's also blower to blower, but the 347 had a much smaller blower and a smaller head compared to the 351. But we're just looking at the capability here. We're basically looking at the 351, well, should we say, like the junkyard 351. That's basically what it is. Okay, re-ring, re-bearing, reseal, go out again, because this piston combination is just exactly that, you know. And also the difference between the two was like 40-60 horsepower. One of the reasons for that is the 351, perhaps this one here, came up with 5/64 thick rings as opposed to the 1/16 that the 347 came up with. And I remember somebody did a dyno test on a Legacy small block Chevy, and they said the LS made more power than the Legacy small block Chevy 350 because the heads was better. Well, yes and no. Okay, because they also pointed out the flow rate between the small block Chevy Legacy head and the LS. The flow numbers were almost identical. But the reason for that, Legacy block losing out big time, because it also came with a 5/64 ring pack, as opposed to 116 a 3mm. You got 5/64, 5/64, whatever the doggone thing was, probably thick, looked like a, well, controlling ring looked like a sandwich. Now, that's it. It is not surprising that it lost by 40 or 60 horsepower. That's not hard to fathom, because ring drag is significant. Okay, and I've rotated small block Chevy and old school 351 Windsors and or Legacy 351 Windsors or 302 with the thick rings. I'll tell you, I mean they had like 200,000 miles. It still took about, oh gosh, 45 foot-pounds of torque to rotate them, and they're tired. That's how much drag they have. So you would lose that if you went to the old school type piston with thick ring. Remember, just because it's thick doesn't mean it's going to seal better. Sometimes the thinner ring could conform to the distortion of the block rather than the rigid, thick, super thick ring with the block's moving a little bit or the bore's moving a little bit. It couldn't quite move with it. Sometimes the smaller ring or thinner rings have a tendency to conform to the bore more effectively or more better when the block is really stressed out. So that's one good thing with a thinner ring. And I've ran a 028 from 043. One of them sprint car deal. Yeah, it's very, very thin, and you go, oh. The only problem with the thin ring is that its ability to take the heat from the piston, your medium to take heat out of the piston top of the piston to the ring and then to the cylinder wall. If the ring is super thin, then the piston have a tendency to run a little bit on the hotter side, because your transfer medium or your mode to transfer the heat from the top of the pistons through the rings, if they're super thin, then the transfer is a lot less. Okay, so let's get back to this 351. So people build LS swap, whatever. What I'm talking about here is a 351 swap. Okay, a Ford to a Ford if need be, or sometimes somebody probably will do a 351 swap to a Camaro. I have a friend who did that. Okay, and God bless his soul, he's gone now. He had a Camaro with a high RPM, a small block Ford, and it was part of the Street Outlaws. Anyway, let's get back to the subject. So when G went back to the Dyno, now with E85, and of course he switched ahead to the 220 Renegade AFR. Now we just, what was it, 6 pounds of boost. He made 496 horsepower, basically 500 horsepower, with 6 pounds of boost and 485 foot-pounds of torque. That is doggone impressive. What if he pushed this to 14 or 15 pounds like he did with the 347? I know, because a long rod, and even though it's got the heavier ring here, I mean, I can see this with a better cylinder head making over 700 horsepower. This follow-up video, he will re-dyno that thing, which at 496 at 6 pounds. And if he pushes it to 14, 15 psi, well, guess what? I think it'll get very close to 700 or a tad a little above that. That's with old school, old inefficient ring pack. All right? So he's paying the penalty already. At 500 horsepower with just 6 pounds of boost, I bet you if he had the 116 pack in this thing, the lightweight rings or thinner rings, you can easily see another 40, 30 horsepower. Okay? It would be 530 or 550. That's not hard to even imagine. So this thing with 14 pounds of boost, and right now 500, 14 pounds of boost, yeah, 650, it'll equal the 347. But I predict this one might even go to 700 horsepower. And remember, it's been done. Guys that have been running 351, junkyard 351s, like they do junkyard LS, on a turbo, we've seen it 900,000 horsepower. I've done one magazine, I've done a magazine article before, and the guy goes, how? No, it was a book. Now I've done one article before, and the guy says, how much power did you make on a 351? And I said to him, they're about close to 1,000 horsepower. And this is 20 years ago. And the guy looks at me like he couldn't believe it. And I think somebody here on YouTube has done the same thing on a junkyard 351. And like I said, with gasoline, he detonated at about 1,000 horsepower, and that sucker came apart. But I bet you if it had E85, it probably would have lived, because the combustion spikes probably will not be there. And if it would have retracted a little back down, on a safe spot, instead of running on the edge to make the maximum power, you just back it down, and with the consistency and stability of E85 or any alcohol-based fuel, it probably would have survived for several more times until it probably cracks. Okay? Because when this thing is so stressed out, a stock crank and everything, they start to bend to an S. Even a billet or a forged crank will start to flex to an S And when they do that, they load number 2 and number 4. So when you take apart your oil pan and pull the main capsule, look at 2 and 4 from the get-go. If 2 and 4 looks good, 1, 3, and 5 would be fine. It's those 2 main saddles that take a beating, because the S would, what the crank would try to go to an S or like this, okay? And basically a twist. Anyway, we will follow this up with the dyno at 14 pounds, and hopefully the rings don't die, because I don't even think he cleaned this up. He just picked it up and threw it in like the LS boys. Now the Ford boys. Okay, so they do it with LS, throw it in, perhaps some will change the head gasket and go out, stock rings, stock everything. Same thing with the Ford. They can do the same thing. And to tell you the truth, there are more 351s out there, okay, at a cheaper price than you would with an LS. They probably give that sucker away. LS, the junkyard people, no, another hot rodder, okay? They're gonna charge you. They already know how much they can charge you and stretch your wallet with that regard. With a 351, they don't know you're gonna do this, but that's an option, okay? Instead of doing an LS swap, stay with a 351 swap and see. Because at 6 pounds of boost with a V1, a small blower, to make 500 horsepower, that's pretty much the LS. And the LS, it's also got a better cylinder head, okay, from a port layout. It's a high port, especially the exhaust a high port, compared to any of the production, factory-based aftermarket heads out there. The exhaust port's still low port. The LS has got a high port layout, and the doggone intake, even if it's cathedral, it's still a high port angle coming in with an effective swirl, proper to it. It's gonna get a darn good cylinder head. So I suggest do a 351 swap and go from there and look. With a good aftermarket head, you can produce a good number. But I tell you what, like I said on my Facebook account on Benalameda Racing, if you were to stroke a 351 and backstroke a 347, 351, take the bacon by far. It is much superior. Bigger main bearings, bigger main saddles, stouter block, everything. And if you put the same type of cylinder head or even bigger cylinder head for the bigger displacement, you're going to even make more power than a 347 or 353 or 363. Okay, so I hope this was clear to you guys, and post any questions, and please subscribe, like, and share, and comment, so we can keep this going. Thank you very much.